Seattle. Huh? On our trip in Seattle. She was there for 24 hours. Emergency surgery. 2 nights at Harborview, yeah.
Gotta get one of the scooters.
No, bicycle, e-bike, not scooter. E-bike, not scooter.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
That's
The ER people were saying they get people in there with the scooters all the time. This is their first e-bike break.
No, I meant she was asking us for a scooter for her niece.
Oh, the knee scooter. She got the knee scooter, the swanky knee scooter.
Did she
Yeah.
have one? She found one?
Oh, yeah, we got it.
Good, good, good.
I hooked her up with the right
She
one.
knew I had broken my leg, so she wondered, but mine didn't allow me to have one of those.
Oh, yeah. No, I helped her with her independence for sure. But that's why she's not here. But she's watching live on the big TV. She put it up on our smart
Your
TV.
big one, yeah.
She already had it. Yeah. You what? Yeah.
She flew back.
17 screws and a plate. She basically did to her ankle what I did to my wrist skiing. So. But.
Make sure the mics are.
Hello, hello. Yeah. Mine's on.
Check.
Testing.
Testing. Testing. Can you hear me? No? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
We heard you.
Is there something I need to turn on here?
No, you're good.
You're good. Yeah.
Okay. But you can hear me.
What's that?
I'm live. Are we ready to start? Okay. She's ready for us to start. Good evening, everyone. Yeah, my name is Scott Sheffield, and thanks, Tom, for that introduction. I'm Scott Sheffield. I'm on the executive committee of the Transylvania Partners for Democracy. The Transylvania Partners for Democracy, in case you don't know, our mission, I'm going to read you our mission statement. Transylvania Partners for Democracy is a nonpartisan alliance of patriotic citizens committed to protecting our constitutional democracy from far-right political extremists through education and conversation. So that's what we're all about. This is our, and let me, before we go further with the program, I want to introduce the executive committee of the organization. We've never done that before in our other events, but I want to do that. First, Wayne Clark is sort of the father of this organization. Susan Leffler, sitting right here. Al Platt is not here yet, but he is a member of the executive board. And then, of course, Dan Carter. That is the executive board of the Transylvania Partners for Democracy. I said I was on it. All right. I think I started with that, actually. Okay, so this is the fourth of our events. We decided to do this event because when we look back at the history of far-right extremism, we can learn one valuable lesson. They, far-right extremist groups, say what they mean what they say, and in the end, do what they say. Okay? So with that in mind, we said, well, what document could we use to know exactly what the far right is going to do if they're in power? And of course, the answer was Project 2025. That is the origin of this event, and that's why we're doing this. And we're going to start off with a brief introduction about Project 2025 by Dan. And before he does his introduction, I want to go ahead, if I can, introduce the panel. I'll start from over there. Julia Dunn is the lead teacher at Pisgah Collective and outdoor-based education program in Pisgah Forest. She has a broad educational background and experience. She will describe some of the most important and negative effects of Project 2025 in terms of education in Transylvania County in North Carolina. Max McKellar, Mac, excuse me.
I get
Mac,
that a lot.
Okay, I don't know why I know that. Mac has practiced law in Brevard for nearly 30 years. He's a former Navy officer in the Pacific, and he served as a district judge for 2 years. He describes himself as a proud Appalachian who is committed to creating a thriving and just community. He's going to focus his remarks on the alarming aspects of potential actions by a future Trump administration. Okay, next is the Reverend Angela Emerson. She was an attorney in Atlanta for more than 20 years before becoming an Episcopal priest. She's going to talk about the threats of Project 2025 to policies related to women's rights at the grassroots level. And let's see, next is Bobby King. He's been involved in refugee resettlement in the United States and abroad. He is presently working with several agencies in the Southeast to obtain legal services and sponsorship for recently arrived asylum seekers who are in the U.S. legally. He's going to outline the devastating economic and moral impact that the enactment of the former President Trump's immigration plans would bring. And finally, James Carley. Where are you, James? James is currently serving on the Brevard Planning Board and with the Citizens Climate Lobby, and has a deep background in exploring the broad implications of global warming. And he will be dealing with, of course, anti-environmental policies associated with Project 2025. So there is your group, and we're going to kick it off by letting Dan say a few words to introduce the whole topic.
And they will be a few words. We chose Project to talk as a kind of basis for this panel this evening, Project 2025, because of, I think, its revealing aspects. These panelists are going to be discussing it, particularly not only nationally, but how it would affect us if these policies were carried out. Now, most of you by now know, at least have heard something about Project 2025. As recently as February of this year, March, I think it was, a Ipsos poll showed that only 12% of Americans had even heard of Project 2025, even though it had been out about 5 months by that time. That has certainly changed in the last few months. As many of you know, it was created by the Heritage Foundation, Conservative Heritage Foundation, and it's not the first time they've done this. They go back to 1980 with Ronald Reagan, but this one is much more elaborate, much more extensive, and much more well-funded. It's the real name of it, of course, is Mandate for Leadership. As Susan pointed out, mandate is the right word for it because it makes it clear this has to be done by the next administration. It's properly called Project 2025, I think, simply for shortness there. Kevin Phillips, who is the head of the foundation, of the Heritage Foundation, said on 3 different occasions that I've been able to find, this is a blueprint that will allow a re-elected Donald Trump to institutionalize Trumpism at every level of government. I should add that this project has been well-financed, bankrolled by a handful of billionaires, many of them in the fossil fuel industry, and it is supported by over 70 conservative institutions, although I discovered reading just recently that about a half dozen of them have withdrawn when the heat got just a little bit too much for them there. Of course, once the toxic aspects of this became more obvious as the summer passed on, former President Trump reacted. Any of you here old enough to remember Hogan's Heroes, the television series? Remember Sergeant Schultz? I see nothing, I know nothing, I hear nothing. This is what Donald Trump said. Let's see if I can read it. I know nothing about Project 2025. I see nothing, I know nothing, I hear nothing. I have no idea who is behind it. It disagrees with some of the things, I disagree with some of the things they're saying, and some of the things they're saying are ridiculous and abysmal. Anything they do, however, I wish them luck, but I have nothing at all to do with them. Should we really be surprised that this is a lie? Trump has spoken repeatedly to the Heritage Foundation. 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago, at an April meeting, he went to the trouble of saying, let me see if I can read this, the Heritage Foundation is going to lay the groundwork and detail plans for exactly what the movement will do. But he's had a memory lapse since then. He doesn't remember that. He also, they've come to light all these photographs and pictures of him flying around the country with Kevin Roberts, the head of the foundation. But somehow, sort of memory problems I think we've got going on here, there. So what is more important, however, than what Trump says about it, it's pretty clear, I think, that someone who refused to read more than a 2-page intelligence summary once a week with lots of pictures is not going to read a 997-page document. But that's not what's important. What's important about Project 2025 is that it was written, 28 of the 38 primary authors served in the previous Trump administration. All of the rest of them are in line for appointments in a future administration. And in a lengthy analysis of all things, I would expect it's some left-wing organization, but CBS News put together a team of individuals who went carefully down through the document, and they looked at the proposals there and compared them to what former President Trump had tried to do or did during his first administration and what he is now talking about doing. And they were extraordinarily close. So whether or not the administration has actually embraced this openly, it hasn't. It is, I think, a faithful blueprint for what they have in mind for the next administration.
Thanks, Dan. Well, let's jump right into it. Mac, let's hear the bad news about the Department of Justice and so forth. So,
you know, I always get turned to give the bad news. So that's what I'm going to do. What Dan had to say is exactly accurate. What is being said is what's going to happen. It is being said, though, by a person, but not just a person. It appears an entire political party whose sole goal is to acquire power. I think about, I was looking as I was researching to, I'm a lawyer, you can tell by all the tabs on the papers, and I finally just stopped doing it because I was starting to get a little sick to my stomach. But this is Trump versus the United States, the decision. This is just the first part of it. And one of the reasons it was rendered, giving unprecedented immunity to a president while they're doing any official acts or anything within the outer reaches of their official acts, is because Donald Trump in his 4-year administration was allowed to appoint 3 Supreme Court justices, which tipped the balance of power from a nearly even split, where you got some decisions going one way and some decisions going another way, to a supermajority. And in Mitch McConnell, I'll never forget it, in 2016, early 2016, when an opening came up, he used the excuse that there's an election coming up in November. Let us wait till the election goes before we appoint somebody. That's the right way to do it. We give the people the authority. When the exact same situation occurred in 2020, he said, oh, no, we're in charge. We're going to go ahead and appoint a 3rd justice. So instead of having the 1 Supreme Court justice, possibly 2, that he was entitled to, He was able to get 3, and the 3 have made all the difference in all sorts of decisions that have come out. So when we're talking about this Project 2025, I think you've got to always keep in the background that there's a supermajority on the Supreme Court of extremely conservative folks that were put there through, frankly, Mitch McConnell's deception. And I think we ought to not let the political party that allowed that to happen get away with that. That is a reason that we're in this boat. That is a reason why when we read in this document that there's 4 reasons that they are putting together this package, that restoring the family as the centerpiece of American life and protecting our children, that's number 1. Do you think they mean family as in the way a lot of people mean it, which is a group of people who love each other and live their lives together and share each other? No. They mean a specific definition of family. If you go to the section on Department of Labor, they specifically say that the United States needs to return to the Judeo-Christian tradition stretching back to Genesis, recognizing fruitful work is integral to human dignity and service to God. One of the stipulations, one of the things they want to put into effect is, and oddly enough, they want Sunday to become a mandatory holiday. They want it to become a time and a half to be paid with the express reasoning that God ordained the Sabbath as a day of rest, and until very recently, the Judeo-Christian tradition sought to honor that mandate by moral and legal regulation of work on that day. They want to make it 1.5. They want you to have an employer have to pay time and a half, and if they pay time and a half, then they will they can work that day. If they don't treat it as a holiday, they'll be in violation of labor law. The idea is, let's don't work on Sundays. You know, that seems like it contradicts the First Amendment of the Constitution. I read it. I carry it with me everywhere. And yet, this is a stated goal of this document. Another stated goal of the document is to attack the Great Awakening, which is, I have to confess, I've been following politics for a while. I don't know what being woke really means. Does it mean being awake? Does it mean being alert to what's going on? I think that's a good thing. And so to say that we are attacking the woke culture is terrifying. Because the way they want to attack it, in going through the provisions surrounding the Department of Justice and the Department of Defense, is that they want to essentially fire anybody who's in there who is not of a like political mind, doesn't have the same definition of family, doesn't have the same definition of religion, doesn't have the same definition of faith as the President of the United States. Large swaths of the department, the Justice Department, have been captured by the unaccountable, bureaucratic, managerial class and radical left ideologues who have embedded themselves throughout its offices and components. It's woke. The military apparently is woke. They have too many captains and generals apparent that this is in this document. I've got it tabbed if anybody wants to come see it. Too many captains and generals who are trying to be too woke. We need to make sure that the military is not a petri dish, an experiment for social justice. We need to make sure that anyone who suffers from, their words, gender dysphoria needs to be discharged. They need to reinstate anyone who was released from the military for failing to follow a lawful order, to wit, have a COVID vaccine. I was in the military. The baseline of the military is you follow the order you're given, which gets really scary when you start thinking about the fact that the chief executive is the commander-in-chief and is the one giving the orders. And so the military is supposed to do what he says. They even discuss using the military in immigration enforcement, which violates about a half dozen laws of the United States. And they want to activate and send the military down to do that. Like I say, I've tabbed dozens of pages, but essentially what the plan says, the playbook, if you will, for a conservative administration, if they're elected, is to take what a department, one of the oldest departments in the federal government, the Justice Department, and gut it and replace it with people who are like-minded to the chief executive. Now, the Justice Department has always prided itself on being more independent, being able to speak truth to power. The FBI, the primary investigative body of their organization, is semi-autonomous. It has a director who's appointed for 10-year terms. They want to get rid of the 10-year terms, by the way, for the FBI director. They say the FBI should be directed solely by the President of the United States and through his appointed people. They also want to, it goes on, but essentially it gets down to, they want to eradicate what they term wokeness, which I did not find a definition for, and I looked and looked. But they want wokeness to be routed out of all the governmental agencies, and especially the Department of Justice, the department that is supposed to ensure civil rights are followed, the department that's supposed to make sure that voting rights are enforced. There's several provisions in here that want to switch the way voting rights are enforced so that it's more under the control of the political arm. We're talking about taking an organization that everyone essentially trusts, except for the 35% who don't and who are going to be voting the other way, and they want to make them beholden to the President of the United States. I'm going to read to you just one page. This is my favorite page. Well, actually, there's two favorite pages. The playbook says, and that's what I want to call it, because that's what it is. This is the playbook. If we win, this is what we're going to do. Where wanted under proper federal law, initiate legal action against local officials, including district attorneys, who deny American citizens the equal protection of the law by refusing to prosecute criminal offenses in their jurisdictions. America was founded on states and localities being able to have their own legal system. And yet he says, except if I don't like what they're doing. And if I don't like what they're doing, we're going to sue them. We're going to take criminal charges against a district attorney who doesn't prosecute the people that he wants, which are going to include, according to another section in here, private libraries and public health agencies who don't follow the directions given to them by the federal government, who think they're above the law. Libraries and public agencies. Sorry. I get a little bit wound up, and I realize I'm running out of time. I want to highlight my favorite page, page 562. In that page, the conservatives want to direct the Department of Justice to serve as the vanguard for a return to lawfulness and non-discrimination by refusing to allow any state, government, public university, any sort of public, semi-public agency, anything that receives federal money to exercise any sort of thumb on the scale to assist inclusivity programs, anything that they refer to as DEI. The Department of Justice unenforcing laws that have been on the books for 40 years that have brought our society to a level of equity that has never existed in the United States seems a little bit short-sighted. I'll point to my other favorite one, and I hope I'm not stealing any of Julia's thunder, but he's also going to direct the Department of Justice to begin enforcing the criminal prohibitions in 18 U.S. Code 1461 and 1462. That's also known as the Comstock Law. It was passed in the 1870s, and it illegalizes, sorry, I wrote it up. It makes illegal sending in the mail any obscene, lewd, lascivious, indecent, filthy, or vile article. If you're a lawyer, try to define any of those words. Matter, thing, or device or substance, and every article or thing designed or adapted are intended for producing abortion, or for any indecent or immoral use. This law was used when it was first put into place to prevent contraception from traveling through the mail. And so, and everyone knows how an IUD works, I think. Everyone knows how various medications work. They're asking for criminal prosecution by the Department of Justice against the providers of those, what are regular health practices now. So I think when we look at the weaponizing and the attempt to weaponize and essentially firing large swaths of the Department of Justice, who we kind of have counted on to enforce the law evenly, is terrifying and scary. And like I say, I wish I hadn't been limited to 5 or 6 minutes. I know I've gone 10 now. Thank you, Scott.
Okay, next, Julia.
Well, I can relate to the feelings of disgust that he felt upon I read the U.S. Department of Education section, but I'm glad that I did. It's really important, and the words like terrifying and scary, and frustrating hardly begin to cover it. I was actually really struck by how many of their premises I was beginning to be tricked into agreeing with, and how easily somebody reading this could be tricked into thinking that the solutions they're offering are well-intentioned or that they would even work. That was upsetting. They actually do a decent job of laying out some of the more glaring issues in our public education system, but then they manipulate it and fearmonger, I think with the hope that people are gonna accept a wholesale defunding and resegregation of public education in this country. The subtitle to this section could very well be Families and Students Don't Need a Department of Education. They go on to make a series of blatantly bad faith arguments of causality between the beginning of the Department of Education and a stagnation of student academic outcomes. They claim that there's no conclusive evidence that more taxpayer spending on schools improves student outcomes. The key word to read there is conclusive. Strewn throughout the entire Department of Education section, they state as fact many, many inconclusive assumptions. This is them telling us that they want to defund public schools. They spend an inordinate amount of space in this section explaining the readily known fact that the US Department of Education's establishment was associated with the Civil Rights Act. This is more of their coded manipulation. They know who they're talking to when they draw that comparison. They state as evidence of some sort of malfeasance that Congress sought to improve educational outcomes for disadvantaged students by providing additional compensatory funding for low-income children. That they do not consider this a valuable use of funding is emphasized by their stated desire to restore state and local government control over education funding. And they in fact think that the federal government should confine its involvement in education to that of a statistics gathering agency that disseminates information, period. That's all they want. They actually want to completely unravel it, but a lot of the problems that they rely upon to set the stage for their defunding and resegregation of public schools are actually results of their obstruction and withholding of funding for decades. They use the concept of empowering students and families as code for taking away the funding from the only educational option legally required to serve any and everyone. In Transylvania County, we're already seeing the effects of teachers leaving the area or the profession en masse, and a lot of that might be financial, but it also has to do with the politicization of their roles as teachers. The author concedes that the US Supreme Court and other federal courts have consistently recognized that parents have the right and duty to direct the care and upbringing of their children, and then go on to repeatedly claim that this right is somehow under attack, citing very little evidence. They ridicule the Department of Education's negotiated rulemaking process, wherein the department hears from stakeholders. They don't like the outcome, and so they're claiming their rights are being violated. It's, again, with very little evidence to support that. They go on and on over and over about parents' rights, and they hardly mention students or teachers throughout the entire section. They claim to desire robust classroom discussions and censorship, but so much of what they're advocating is an accelerated siloing of educational opportunity in America. They also, of course, neglect to explain any aspect of how our educational system could possibly fund an endless array of options like this, especially if they unravel the Department of Education. the publicly funded option cannot function if every single parent involved has some sort of overarching say. And our current system manages that reality by allowing any parent who wishes and can to educate their children otherwise. They wrap it up by talking about, they claim that setting education policy on the right track long-term would require sunsetting the Department of Education entirely. And then they follow that by immediately claiming that doing so would not result in fewer resources and less assistance for children with special needs or low-income families. And history just makes it very clear that that is absolutely not the case. I also read the Health and Human Services section, so this is from that. They outright call for the elimination of Head Start, which would obviously be devastating, especially in a county like ours, where we have preschool spots for less than half of our population under 6, which has been an overwhelming burden for many families in Transylvania County. They want to prioritize home child care over universal child care, which completely disregards many families' circumstances. So I guess I just wanted everybody in this room to really think about who we want in charge in Transylvania County, somebody who wants to dismantle our educational system, or those who believe that it's worth investing in. And I think that Democrats and people on the left are equally and often even more concerned about a lot of the issues raised in this document, but we just know that moving backwards is an unlikely way to move forwards.
Thank you, Julia. Angela.
Thank you, Scott. This document is extremely well written and deserves to be read closely and analyzed because it can be very, very deceptive, as Julia said. It does not have a program or a section directed strictly at women or women's issues. So what I'm going to do is go through 6 points that are sort of repeated as themes throughout the document. Number 1, they want a government to enforce a Bible-based, social science reinforced definition of marriage and family. Point number 2, families comprised of a married mother, father, and their children are the foundation of a well-ordered nation and healthy society. The male-female dyad is essential to human nature, and every child has a right to a mother and a father. Children have the right to be raised by the men and women who conceived them. They deserve both the nurturing of a mother and the play and protection of a father. All other forms of family result in higher instability. Goodbye single-parent households. Goodbye to any kind of alternative family. They want the next president to examine every federal rule, agency regulation, contract, grant, regulation, and legislation and eliminate a whole slew of words from those policies. Those words would include sexual orientation, diversity, equity, inclusion, gender equality, identity, equity, awareness, and sensitivity. All of that goes. Abortion, reproductive health, and reproductive rights, and any other word that's equally offensive. That's what this document calls for. Number 3, the Secretary of Health and Human Services must ensure that all programs and activities are rooted in a deep respect for innocent human life from day one until natural death. Abortion and euthanasia are not health care. They're not health care. The Secretary should eliminate the Health and Human Services Reproductive Health Care Access Task Force and install a pro-life task force to ensure that all of the department's divisions seek to use their authority to promote the life and health of women and their unborn children. And last, instead of protecting women's and children's unalienable human rights and propelling their ability to thrive in society, past Democratic administrations have nearly erased what females are and what femininity is through gender policies and practices. Now, that's the underpinnings of this document and all of the policies that they're pursuing. As a priest of the Episcopal Church, I feel compelled to say that this does not represent Christian thought nor the teachings of Jesus. It's a gross distortion and manipulation of some very deeply held theological beliefs. It's not just an elimination of individual rights that have been gained and developed over the past years. It is a step into a different kind of governmental future in which the government defines the central core relationships of our society and uses the full power and resources of the government to enforce it. So when J.D. Vance talks about married couples with children having more votes, or maybe they get a greater dependency exemption, or maybe single-family households don't get any at all. But the full power and resources of the government are going to go to encourage their definition of marriage and family.
Thank you, Angela. Bobby. You're up next, Bobby.
Good evening. Immigration is indeed one of the big hot-button issues of the 2024 election. I think most all of us, regardless of political persuasion or philosophy or whatever, would like to see a balance of security and compassion at the border. Project 2025 does not show that. When we talk about immigrants, and I'm going to talk about mostly illegal or undocumented immigrants, and the terminology is very complicated. There are a little more than 11 million unauthorized immigrants in America today. And unauthorized makes it sound like they're illegal, but they're not all illegal. Included in that are a number of illegal immigrants. There are also asylum seekers who are applying for asylum, so they call them unauthorized, but they are legally here. It includes DACA students. It includes a number of people with temporary visas. So those are the real basic numbers. It does not include refugees because that's not the big concern of 2025, although it is a concern, and I'll talk a little bit about that later on. Project 2025's recommendations are really based on incomplete. Can you hear me back there? Okay. Are really based on incomplete or false information. And I would say, and this is not a stretch, that a lot of it is just downright immoral. Because of the complexity of all of this, I'm just going to scratch the surface. And my friend Judy Backhouse, Judy, would you raise your hand back there? She's got a bunch of index cards. If you have questions, I know I won't be able to answer them all tonight, but if you'll put your name and contact information, your question, I promise you I will get back with you with an answer, the correct answer, as soon as possible. My sources are too many to mention. It would just take up too much time. So as I go through this, if you want to know what my sources are later, I can tell you, but they're basically Project 2025 itself, Department of Health and Human Services, Homeland Security, the Pew Charitable Trust, CNN, NPR, have a whole list of them. The first thing that jumped out at me when I read the summary of Project 2025, and I have to admit I hadn't read all 1,000 pages or however many it is. I don't know if any of us have. But the thing that really jumped out at me was throughout the document, there are recommendations about consolidating various agencies and let this agency do that and the other one. And regarding immigration, they're recommending combining CBP and ICE and USCIS, the three primary immigration offices, combining those with DOJ, Department of Justice, with what was Homeland Security, with the Office of Refugee Resettlement, which is primarily a humanitarian organization. And I don't know why. And they don't say why. Or maybe I need to go back and read all 1,000 pages. But it's kind of scary. You know, why would they want to combine these agencies in one? I know they say, well, we want to do it because it'll be financially more efficient. We'll cut out a lot of bureaucracy, and you know, none of us like bureaucracy, but it's kind of scary. Why would you put the Office of Refugee Resettlement in with Homeland Security and these other folks? Okay, they're apples and oranges. And I honestly, I don't have the answer to that. Let's take a look at economic costs, because money is what seems to inform decisions and recommendations. And the data I'm going to share is for illegal immigrants, undocumented immigrants, asylum seekers, and refugees, okay? And what it costs us, federally, locally, state. But I'm giving you the stuff up front, okay? There's another side to the cost business. Illegal and undocumented immigrants make use of some forms of federal welfare, that is food, Medicaid, housing, to the tune of about $42 billion a year. I don't doubt that. I looked at a lot of sources. Former President Trump says that illegal immigrants cost us $2 billion a year. He has no basis for that. He won't give any numbers on that. Just based on what I've looked at, 5 or 6 different sources, I think it's probably close to half of that, if that. That is maybe $100 billion a year. And that's a lot of money. In 2019, 4 million children of illegal immigrants cost states and local school systems $68.1 billion. That's not federal, that's state, but that's a lot of money, and it is a concern. Okay, now there are ways to handle that, or begin to handle that, and I'll talk about it later, but it is a legitimate concern. Now let's look at the benefits side. In 2022, undocumented immigrants paid $59.5 billion in federal tax. State contributions were, payment to states was $37.3 billion in state and local government, okay? $16 billion in Social Security, $3 billion in Medicaid. This is what they paid into it, illegal or undocumented immigrants. Immigrants tend to work in low-wage jobs, we all know that, which in the short time brings real wages down. That is, if somebody's getting paid $10 or $12 an hour, it's going to bring everybody's wages down. We understand that. But the data also shows, as we move forward, like in the next 10 years, that those trends are going to go up, or those figures are going to go up as undocumented immigrants gain more skills. And that's been proven. Now, we all know that immigrants will do jobs that Americans won't do, primarily in agriculture, landscaping, construction, stuff like that, okay? But what would we do without them? The chicken industry in Georgia, which is one of the largest in the United States, would have to shut down. The apple growing business in the Hendersonville area right up around here would have to shut down. I went to a forum where they were debating that, and one farmer stood up and said, you know, I'm a Republican, but I tell you what, you can't let these people go, you know, or we're going to have to shut everything down. Immigrants are not only job takers, they're job makers. And what a lot of people don't know is that they actually create jobs. In fact, immigrants are about 80% more likely, I'll say the number again, they're 80% more likely than American-born citizens to start new businesses. And we're not just talking about mom and pop grocery stores, okay? We're talking about major industries, okay? Something like over 200 of the Fortune 500 corporations were started by immigrants, okay? Now we say, well, they were started a long time ago, and that is true. But immigrants are continuing to be entrepreneurs in ways that drive our economy. Immigrants commit less crime than Native Americans, native-born Americans, okay? Since the 1960s, immigrants have committed 60% less immigrants are incarcerated than native-born Americans. That's a huge number. I want to give you a quick snapshot here. Let's see. In Our population here in Transylvania County is about 5.1% Latino Hispanic. I'm sure that we have oops, excuse me.
Needs to pick up your voice.
Oh, okay. Is that okay? Okay, sorry. The Hispanic Latino population in Transylvania County is 5.1%, so it's rather small. For the state, North Carolina, it's 10.7%. But I suspect that even though our numbers are small, that Transylvania is something of a microcosm of the entire United States, because even these small numbers of people face the same challenges that other immigrants face. And likewise, immigrants in Transylvania County make this a better country. I don't know if you all saw it. I want to tell you about it before I leave here, but in May the 6th, copy of the Transylvania Times, my favorite newspaper, better than the New York Times, okay, had a wonderful article on concerns about Latino youth in our county, and it's really good. And you can get this from Transylvania Times for nothing if you wanted to call them and ask them about it. Also, I wanted to say some positive things about our school system. I know there's a lot of controversy about our school system, but 7.2% of the multilingual, in Transylvania County, 7.2% of all the students are multilingual students, and most of those are Spanish speaking. Statewide, about 25% of our 25% of the students ESL students or multilingual students met the requirement for English advancement. In Transylvania County, that number was almost 33%. So that says something. And some of you education people may be able to tell me if this is accurate or not, but I think we have 3 multilingual teachers that rotate between 9 schools. Does that sound correct? That's a lot of work, okay? So they're obviously doing a pretty good job. The state dropout rate for Hispanics, Latinos is about 31%. In Transylvania County, it's only 10%. So some good things are happening in Transylvania County, and we need to find ways to better support our schools. One thing that I want to say that about meeting the needs of immigrants and handling a lot of these problems is that the Appropriations Act that came out, the $118 billion Appropriations Act that came out, was defeated in February, had a lot of things in it that would have already begun to solve these problems. And Senator James Lankford, who is a Republican, was one of the main architects of this bill. And I just want to tell you just a few of the things that were in this bill, and hopefully this or something similar will eventually be passed. But it included money for more border barriers, expand detention facilities, hire more immigration and customs enforcement and border patrol agents, hire more asylum seekers and immigration judges so they could adjudicate these cases even at the border and faster in other places, expedite the asylum process, and stop catch and release. Catch and release is where people come across the border and they honestly present themselves and to say, I want to apply for asylum in the United States of America, okay?
Finish up.
Okay, give me 30 seconds. Okay, real quick, I'm sorry. And some of these people get what we call humanitarian parole, okay? So they're allowed to come into the United States and seek asylum, all right? This would allow that to happen a lot faster. Right now, to get a job, an asylum seeker can legally get a job, but they can't get authorized to get a job for 150 days, okay? So what happens in the meantime? They're using the public benefits. This would speed that up. Okay, I have a few more things, but I think I covered most of them. Sorry if I went too long.
That's okay. Next, James.
Thank you, and I could say so much about immigration as well, but my topic tonight is on the environment. Before I dive in, just want to do a room check. How you guys feeling tonight? You scared yet? Are you fired up yet? Yeah, are you learning some stuff? Stuff you didn't know? That's good. Okay, so my name is James Carley. I've been working on climate issues at international and local levels for over 10 years. And I'm here to tell you what Project 2025 has to say about the environment and what it means for our community. And I'm going to dive in first. Well, first of all, what we've gone through this panel so far is basically Project 2025 is a roadmap to impose a patriarchal, white, male-dominated, evangelical, so-called Christian theocracy without any non-European people in the country. Now, that sounds like a pathway to power, okay, but there's money involved too. And here's the take, okay? There's a lot of defunding of important programs that we all enjoy and take for granted here. I live here, well, my family's been here since the 1750s, bouncing around between Rowan County, western North Carolina, and northeastern Tennessee. So I've got deep roots here, and I love the forest. I grew up hiking and climbing, and when I was up in New York building my career, I wanted to come back here because this is home to me, and I love the waterfalls and sitting by the creeks and going out hiking because it's healing to me. And I'm able to do that because these forests are protected federal lands under the tutelage of the U.S. Forest Service, which is an agency of the Department of Agriculture, and the National Park Service up along the Blue Ridge Parkway. Those are two different agencies. So the Forest Service is Department of Ag, and the National Park Service is the Department of the Interior. Project 2025 wants to basically gut all of the funding for those agencies and staffing. Regarding the U.S. Forest Service in particular, the document includes proposals that reduce the scope and influence of the Forest Service, and they want to shift the focus of the Forest Service to wide-scale commercial logging operations, oil and gas extraction operations, mining, and also sales to private developers of various types. So what that means locally, you can say goodbye to those camping trips, to those hiking excursions, and getting lost in the woods over a long weekend with your friends and family. We will lose our public forests to private loggers, housing developers, water bottling companies, and gas pipelines, and others. I like how small Brevard feels, and that's an element of being sandwiched between undevelopable forests. If you like keeping Brevard small, there's no way you can justify electing an administration who would turn the forests over to developers who would cut down the trees and sell Pisgah to housing developers who would build suburbs for rich people's third homes who live out of state. And that's what would happen. Pisgah would become another Conisty, another Lake Toxaway, where I'm still irritated that there's no public access to Lake Toxaway. All right? And what this fundamentally has to do with is that these so-called conservatives, I don't know what they're conserving. These authors of Project 2025, they fundamentally do not believe in the concept of public goods. To them, everything should be privatized, creating oligarchs of the said white Christian men who already have lots of money, and the rest of us would be robbed of our nation's precious bounty. That would be the practical outcome regarding the forests. Now, interestingly enough, Project 2025 goes into a bit of detail about forest fire prevention, okay? They specify that that the Forest Service should focus on preventing fires by ramping up large-scale commercial logging. Because to them, if there are no trees to burn, then there won't be forest fires. This calls for a decrease. They actually specifically say that they need to decrease prescribed burns, which is a very scientifically based and ancient practice of reducing wildfire risk. And it's a handout to the logging industry, But I'll tell you what. You remember Paradise, California? That town that got incinerated? It was full of retirees in the middle of the forest. Boom, gone like a nuclear bomb. Brevard can be the next Paradise. And this would happen because our forests would be handed over to logging companies who have no oversight, no environmental controls, so they cut down lots of trees and woods, export the good timber, and leave piles of waste biomass drying there, ready to be sparked by any fire or heat or discarded cigarette. And then all of a sudden, Brevard is nuked like Paradise. I don't accept that. I can talk about clean water. I can talk about how the National Park Service would effectively be privatized as well, so that we could get oil and gas pipelines running through the corridor of the Blue Ridge Parkway. I could talk about how they want to privatize or actually defund and eliminate NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. which would eliminate our free access to weather and climate data. So say goodbye to your free weather reports. You'd have to subscribe $20 a month for your detailed weather report from your favorite app provider on your smartphone, and that's about it. You wouldn't be able to turn on the TV without paying a local network to know what the weather's going to be at your beach vacation. And then, there's more stuff about eliminating clean energy research. Just a note, because we have to understand that climate change is real, it's happening, it's a very simple physical process. We've underpriced carbon pollution, which is built up in the atmosphere as a winter coat over the Earth that absorbs more and more solar radiation, primarily in the oceans, which are also rising, because when you boil water, the water expands, and the oceans are getting hotter, so they're expanding. That's the primary point of sea level rise. Glacial melt is a secondary factor. So global warming is happening because of underpriced carbon pollution. And the way to stop this from happening is to stop getting energy from fuel sources that we have to burn and get it from the giant fusion reactor in the sky. And we can do that with solar panels. That technology is more efficient than it has ever been before. And China is going wholesale on widespread electrification. They're electrifying their economies and producing goods at bargain basement prices that they're exporting to other countries. And in the meantime, countries all over the world are passing something called a carbon border adjustment mechanism. So if you want to import a trinket from China or the United States, right? Well, it's going to be cheaper for this CBAM from China than something, the identical product exported from America produced with oil and gas. So we're going to lose our competitive edge in the 21st century to China if we insist on being a petrostate and fail to electrify and roll out widespread renewable energy, and that will raise all our costs.
Okay. Thanks, James. Okay, so now, questions to the panel from the audience. Are you gonna wander out there?
No. You take this and I'll have it out there.
I think Kamala Harris should appoint James as Secretary of the Interior.
She knows how to find me.
Well, actually, this is kind of for Dan. This whole Project 2025 doesn't need Trump. If Trump was disappear, it would still occur. And a red Congress could do the same thing. So Trump is just part of the program. Is that right? He's not essential. Is that a safe statement?
Yes.
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 This is a roadmap for Trump or any future Republican administration. These policies are going to live on for years, unfortunately, and we'll have to be diligent in standing up to them and the forces behind them.
Yeah, mine's along the same lines as yours. Trump is just one man. As much as we dislike him, let's just take, for instance, that the Congress and the Senate were more Democratic. He could be impeached, unless he has a lot of MAGA people in there. And if the Democrats happen to hold that, then he could be impeached and it wouldn't go very far. So just putting it into perspective, because it's a horrible thing, absolutely horrible. But in order for people not to go out and panic, there are some guardrails, in my opinion. Am I wrong?
Well, as long as the down ballot elections go a certain way, if they don't,
Let's remember that we're in a state that is considered a 50-50 state. It's less than 1% between Republicans and Democrats. The General Assembly of North Carolina is gerrymandered to the point where there's a veto-proof, potentially veto-proof majority. And so as it does extend, this is not just a Donald Trump thing. This is called the conservative playbook, the conservative promise. I'm like James, I don't know what they're conserving, unless it's hate and discontent. But I remember 10 years ago, like I said, I've been living here 30 years. Been living here 10 years ago. I can remember, 9 years ago, more specifically. I can remember having conversations with some of my Republican commissioner friends here in this very county who were shocked and appalled at things such as what was in here, hating people, defining people as non-human. You're talking about locking up educators and librarians for letting a book about transgender ideology be on the shelves. They're not doing that anymore. And I think that what we have to do, if we want to stop this from coming, I mean, Trump goes away, there's somebody else who can fit in his place. And so it's going to take a much more holistic approach. And that approach starts in the ballot box. It starts on the commission. It starts on the school board. It starts even more local. You were mentioning the Senate and the Congress and being able to impeach him. Well, if what you have locally comports with values that don't comport with this book, you still get a good result. So I've got to say, think local. Think local. And that's a much better way.
Thanks to the whole panel for exposing all this information. It's been really helpful. I wanted to speak to the immigration issue, something that's close to my heart. I'm no expert on the policy, but I do think the piece that we're missing is understanding the country conditions that pushes those people to our country and understanding the humanity of that. I've worked and lived in Latin America for the last 40 years, and I can tell you, particularly from Central America, we're reaping what we've sown with US policy in Latin America. And I think we owe it to some people who are really, literally trying to save their children's lives. And if anybody who's here who's a parent and think, what would you do for your children if you thought your child was gonna get shot down in the street, or if you thought they were gonna die of poverty, you would literally do anything to save their lives. And I think that that's what the piece that we're kind of missing. So I just want to commend the conversation, and also just say that there's a group of people here sitting around the room that are trying to work sort of intentionally about how to make Transylvania County a more welcoming place for refugees and immigrants. So if anybody's interested in getting on board with us, I would invite you to come up and find us. Me or Keith or Bobby are interested in that. Thanks.
Well said, Dee. And just real quick, Dee is new to Brevard, and she's an expert on reproductive health and immigration. She and I have been working together with some asylum seekers. And Keith Mast, Keith, raise your hand here real quick. Keith resettled a Ukrainian family here, to my knowledge, the only true refugees in Transylvania County. There may be others, but he did that through United Ukraine. Anyway, the three of us are working on asylum and refugee issues, and if any of you all are interested in talking with any of us afterwards, we'd love to have some help.
My question is to the Reverend Emerson.
Yes.
If the definition of family is a Judeo-Christian understanding going back to the book of Genesis, is that what I heard? Can I have 2 wives?
Only for you, Jim.
Okay.
It is a mystery, isn't it, that in a time when the 10 Commandments said, thou shalt not commit adultery, polygamy was the norm. So there's a lot of studying to be done. And
So is stoning your daughter, right?
Yes. That is the way we define, the way this book defines family is a gross distortion of the biblical narrative.
I've been collecting quotes from various sources about Project 2025 just to see what people out there are thinking from the media, politicians, and other reprobates. This is one of my favorite, and it's by David Althea, and he says, there's a new political game in town, and it's called gonzo government. There's nothing conservative or traditional or constitutional about this. We had best recognize it and call it for what it is, a fundamental change and destruction of entrenched American values and social institutions.
So I sort of cringe every time I hear the word conservative used in connection with this project or with the Heritage Foundation for that matter. It used to be, but it ain't no more. So I think as an old English teacher, I say let's put conservative in the wastebasket when it comes to Project 2025.
It is a roadmap to oligarchy, is what it is. Oligarchy and theocracy. It's nothing conservative in the American sense of the word.
Over here, Dan.
He's next.
I think it's well understood that the largest party in the United States is the independent party, the undecided party. So I think about this. Why is this so? Well, it seems to me that civics, by and large, is not being taught anymore in high schools. At least that's my understanding. And that we need to take that responsibility seriously to make sure young people are educated how democracy works and that it's up to us. So I'm directing this to the whole board. Is there civics class being taught anymore on the secondary level?
I can tell you, I can answer that.
I would
one.
strongly doubt it.
Yeah.
I'll tell you a little story. I was running for re-election as a judge back in 2020. And I was standing outside a precinct here in Transylvania County. And it was about 7:30, 8 o'clock, right before, or I guess 6:30, right before the polls closed. And a fella comes screaming in, slams on his brakes, rolls down his windows, and said, "Hey, is this where I come to vote for Trump?" And I looked at him and I said, "Well, it's where you come to vote, but you can't do it because I sentenced you to a felony last week." That is the level of civics that is taught in the high school in our area.
Julia, could you respond to that? Because
my awareness is so much more young children in elementary
well,
school.
I'm going to say something about that because
I would be very surprised.
I'm a trainer of social science educators, and they are taught civics, and they are taught to teach it in the high school. What I think happens, especially with Project 2025, is they are vilified, right, as indoctrinators of the liberal left. Somehow they've all become Marxist, right? And they're teaching in a situation of fear. If they introduce anything that's controversial or engage in any pedagogy, by the way, that leads to critical thinking, then parents first. Who gives a damn if the students learn how to think, right? If the parents don't want them to be exposed to anything, then they're put in a persecuted place. And it's so I have sympathy for a social science educator in the high schools. I admire their valor and their persistence, but I also know that the burnout rate is really, really high because they are not supported and they are vilified, right? So that's the challenge to teaching civics, right?
There is also actually evidence, I say evidence, there are statistics that show that civics, I had assumed that civics was a requirement in all high schools. It's not. It's sometimes folded in with something called social science or whatever, but a specific civics course that concentrates on the kinds of information you need about our political system and how it works and so on, in many schools is not taught at all, or if it's taught at such a simple and brief level that it certainly can't prepare students for any kind of a real dramatic understanding of how our system works.
Brian's on the Board of Education, so maybe we should say something to that.
I wasn't actually going to speak on the civics, but it is part of the state curriculum that's required. But as you said, how it's taught makes a big difference. What I wanted to talk about was there was mention of guardrails, and there was talk about voting down the ballot. The guardrails are being chipped away very slowly. It started, from my perspective, when we started making local offices partisan, like the school board. Didn't used to be. didn't have anything to do with party. And it works its way up. Gerrymandering, the taking away of voting rights, our last bastion of protection and guardrail is the Supreme Court. That's been taken away. Local courts, local appeals courts are being taken away. So if you think you've got guardrails, no you don't. They're being taken away from you, and that's one of the reasons why it's so important to vote very carefully on all of the down ballot issues, all your local judges, all of your boards, all of the rest of that. Please, please, please pay attention.
Okay, I think we'll take a couple more questions. Tom, you already did one, so I'm going to let it go to the other person. Yeah, that's what I'm afraid of. Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah. Okay.
That's a lot of big government interference in our personal choices. I thought the Republicans stood against that. That's what Reagan used to say, like, get the government out of your business. Now they're trying to tell us they're here to help us live a right moral path. Get out of here.
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment. We've been talking a lot about federal elections and local. Something that I've learned this year. I am the delegate for Transylvania County to something called the Senior Tar Heel Legislature, which I would bet money on most of you have never heard of. It's part of the legislature since 1993. My husband, by the way, is the alternate, so Rob Stein, Paula Hartman-Stein. And what we learned was that, and so it was 1993, it started part of the North Carolina legislature. For the first few years, these resolutions, the group is, we are an advocacy group for people of this age group, okay? People over 65, which is the vast majority in this room. And so we bring resolutions to the North Carolina General Assembly. That's our purpose, okay? So we're an advocacy group for older adults to get money for the senior center, to get more expansive bandwidth. There are many, many things in health and transportation, you name it, okay? And what Rob and I learned this year is that in the last 12 years, not one of those resolutions have been passed, have been accepted by the North Carolina, the General Assembly. So if we don't change this supermajority thing, good luck in this state. So you pay attention also to the legislators in this state. That's what I'd like to say.
Shout out to candidate Mark Burrows running for House and Adam Tabrouge running for Senate. Although this forum is hosted by a nonpartisan organization.
Thanks for the caveat. Here.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to bring up a point that I don't know has come up, but voting alone seems like a helpless thing that we can do. You know, we're resigned to our single vote. There is an awful lot we can do just by trying to talk to people. And I'm telling you, everybody knows how daunting it is to go up to somebody who is a Trump lover and even bring up the topic. But I think it's honestly something, you know, we are a veritable army right here of 120 people. And if everybody talked to one person a day, and just with some salient points about how sick this whole thing is, you know, you could really make some headway. You can turn some heads and make people think twice about what they're doing. I put together a little prayer for 2024, and I've actually been dropping this off at churches in the area because that is like where things get done often. And I know many of the churches are largely Trump in this whole community.
Not my church.
Well, anyway, and there's like 18 things here that are the most egregious things you've ever imagined anybody could do, let alone a president. One of them is something as simple as all of the suits against him, right? And they will argue that, you know, they're all BS lawsuits. His only defenses are, it's a witch hunt, I'm immune, or the prosecutor was illegally appointed. Never like a shred, of evidence in any one of these. And it's things like that, points like that, that will turn some heads, even Trumpers.
Yeah, we hope so. That's sort of part of our organization's belief as well.
Just
Bobby
real
wants
quick,
to
I want to
respond.
respond to that. I think you just said something that's really, really important. If Kamala Harris wins this election, God, I hope she does, okay, we're still going to be divided. And we're going to be really divided. And Dan, help me out here. Dan Carter. You know, what's the guy's name? John Meacham, he's at Vanderbilt, okay? You know, he gets asked all the time by the networks to analyze the presidency and how it compares to what happened in Reconstruction, all that, and he's really good. He said something the other night that really caught my attention. He'd been speaking about all this complex, esoteric, historical stuff. He said, you know what we really need? He said, we need neighborliness. Okay, and he is absolutely right. And I can tell you from experience, my stalwart wife, Jackie Jenkins, is the head of the precinct, Kathy's Creek precinct, and we've been out there on a couple of elections, okay? And trust me, we're in the minority when we're out there. But we engaged some Republicans out there, had some really meaningful conversations, and we found out that we had a whole lot more in common than we didn't. So doesn't matter who wins, we're still going to be divided, and we're going to have to find ways to communicate with each other than getting in these fierce debates. And I think one way to do it is to find out what we have in common and just get better acquainted.
Okay, Sam, I think you're going to get the last word here.
Oh, thank you.
Last question.
For those of you who don't know me, I'm Sam Edney. I'm chair of the local Democratic Party. I just want to say that one easy way to approach your neighbors and friends is with local issues. Everybody knows the conditions of our schools. That is a nonpartisan issue. Republican kids get just as wet in a classroom when the roof leaks as Democratic kids or independent kids. There is a lot of information flying around now in the Transylvania Times and on political signs talking about if you're not from here or weren't born here, are encouraging people to vote for individuals who were born here and had a long life here. Our courthouse is falling down. Our schools are in complete disrepair. And those things affect Republicans just as they do Democrats. We got here with a commission board. The chairman has been on that board for 20 years. Two of the other members have been on there almost a decade. How did we get here if that experience is so valuable? So it matters who you vote for, and it gives you an opportunity. As Gene Nichols said, it's up to us. It's up to us to save democracy and make change in this county. We've heard from our current commissioners two things. One, we respect and get along with the school board. And yet they ignored what the school board had requested in terms of suicide prevention, in terms of child care, and turned around and gave them $4 million for playgrounds and AstroTurf on a football field. So these are conversations that you can have with your neighbor without bringing up Democrat or Republican. These are real problems in our community that affect all of us. Get to know your local candidates. The last thing I'm going to say is, typically in any election, about 4% of the people do 100% of the work. There's about 6,000 Democrats in Transylvania County. We have about 400 volunteers. Get involved. Be raving fans for Brian O'Neill, Rick Emus, Joe Smith, Christy Blakely, David Borman, Sarah Green, and Claudia Hawkins. These are great candidates. They have committed to work together for the betterment of this community. We have to help them get elected.
Sam. Okay, so a final round of applause for our panelists up here. We really appreciate you guys taking the time and the effort to engage with this 1,000-page document and try to make some sense out of the nonsense that's there. So we really appreciate your efforts. I want to announce the next event of the Transylvania Partners for Democracy. We are going to stage a Celebrate the Constitution rally on the steps of the courthouse and at the gazebo on Constitution Day. And if you don't know when that is, it's September the 17th. At 6 o'clock, be at the courthouse. We're going to celebrate the Constitution. We'll be putting out more information about that and what we're going to do there. And it's your time to say, I love the Constitution. I want to save the Constitution on September the 17th at the courthouse. Also, if there's people in the room that have contacted us and we haven't gotten back to you that want to help us or join our organization or become a supporter of our organization or work with us, if you'll hang around for a few minutes, we'll be happy to engage with you in a discussion about what you can help us do.
I just wanted to add one thing. Our last meeting will be in October. We're still trying to come up with the exact date. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Nancy McLean, who was the author of Democracy and Change. It was Change, and she has a new edition out, and it was a national finalist for the National Book Award, and she's a very well-known national speaker, and she will be here as our kind of final speaker to fire everybody up at the end here.
And thank every one of you for turning up tonight. It's important that you care.
Thank you for doing that.
I'm on the fence every He works for UNHCR.